So today I'm going to be looking at SMB3 Multichannel in practice and see how it works and see what it's useful with and just throw a ton of weird configurations at it and see what breaks it and see what works well. SMB3 Multichannel does a lot of things, but one of its big things it can do that's useful for kind of a home network user is aggregating multiple network ports into one faster file stream. So a lot of people have gigabit networks. It's been around for like 10 plus years now and gotten very cheap. But anything beyond gigabit, like these sorts of 10 gigabit NICs I have here, are pretty rare, pretty expensive, often much more power hungry, often very hard to find in systems like laptops, and just require a lot of network changes. Whereas getting a second gigabit connection can often be very easy, especially if you have a large switch. A cheap 24 port switch is often under $100. You can get dual port gigabit network cards for under, I think, $30, especially if you're willing to go used. You can add a network port to a lot of systems, even via USB, very cheaply. So I'm going to look at a lot of these use cases and see what makes sense with SMB multi-channel. Some other things about multi-channel it can do is it works well with cards of RDMA and the other multi-queues, which lets you optimize multi-threading, which helps with very high-speed transfers. It does a few other things like that well, but for consumer uses, that doesn't really matter. A little bit on the history, it came out with Server 2012 and Windows 8 era, so it's been out for about 8 years now, so I'm going to see if it's improved. Part of its thing is it requires no configuration. That's what they say, it just works. Which, a lot of stuff says it just works and doesn't, so we'll dive kind of into when does it just work and maybe what doesn't work. So now a little bit about my test configuration I'm going to be using. So the test server I have here is an EMC Isilon X200. It's just a dual socket 1366 server with like 20 terabytes of hard drives running in a RAID 0. I just want to get disks, so the disk is not an issue. Next thing, network cards. So I have a lot of network adapters I can play with, but built in I have dual 1 gigabit NICs on the board. I have another dual 1 gig NIC, I have some more dual 1 gig NICs I can put in there, and I have some 10 gigs that I'm going to try mixing in. And I also have some USB ones, so we're going to try to see what works with that. It has dual quad cores, which should be enough for at least lower speed transfers. Networking wise, I have an Aruba S2500, which is a 48 port gigabit switch. Also has 10 gigabit, which I'm going to be trying to aggregate and see how well you can have them work together. It is capable of doing a lot of fancy features, but right now it's just going to be working as a dumb layer 2 switch. Also, for anyone who's wondering, I took the top off of this and just put some fans in it because it's normally really loud and I don't want it loud here. I know there's risks of having exposed high voltage under it, but I'm taking those risks. First test copy folder. On this one, I have a file share on the server, and on this one, it's just an SSD on the local system, and then I have Task Manager. So first thing, we're just going to copy the files. Both systems have two 1 gigabit NICs, and SMB just works. I didn't have to touch anything for this to start working. One other note is both of these systems are connected to a domain with Windows Server doing DNS, which is probably a lot of it, because you want Windows Server to be able to tell so that when you say, I want to go to Isilon, it knows which two NICs to go to. That's just the name of the share. And that's working perfectly. So let's try, bumping this up a step. Test case number 2. So, one other feature that SMB Multichannel says it supports is failover. So that you can have a network card or one of the paths that they're talking to each other fail mid-file transfer with no issues. So right now I'm copying it again. And as we can see, I also have Task Manager on the other system. I'm just going to pull a network cable on the server right now. I just pulled it. And we can see speeds drop for a little bit. Hasn't failed out, but it is having issues. And after a couple of seconds, it comes back. So it seems like about 5 seconds to detect that it's dead, and it shows full speed on single NIC. I also lost my remote desktop connection for half a second too to the system, which tells me it's probably talking mostly over that port. Next test case. So I've done the networking, I changed it around a little bit. So now I have a ConnectX2 connected to my system, which is a 10 gigabit network card. And on the switch, it goes into a 10 gigabit to two 1 gigabits going to the other system. So we're going to see how that works. And the speed's going straight back up. That's weird how it ramps up. But it seems to, and if I look at the server, I can see that it's definitely using both network cards right now. It is oddly low at times, but it might be due to something else, it looks like. It looks like those copy speeds from earlier were just due to a weird issue. It's capable of filling 2 gigabit continuously. Next test, 2 more network cards. So we're going to throw 2 more network cards on the server, so a total of 4 1 gigabit connections. And we're going to just see what happens now. So I'm going to copy the same file over, now with 4 connections. Saw it, it's only using 2 of the connections. on the server. The other two just aren't being touched at all. Well, I ran into my first weird issue of this test. So I have a system that has two of the built-in Intel onboard NICs and then two Pro 1000 NICs on a PCIe card. And whatever I do, I can't seem to get it to use all four of them. I can get it to use either two, but I can't get it to use all of them. I solved the problem by throwing another client at the problem. I have just another desktop here, and it's copying files at a reasonable rate. You probably can't see that, but it's about 230 megabytes a second. It has dual gigabit network cards, and it's copying it with 4 streams to the 4 different network cards on the server, working perfectly. So why doesn't this system do it? I don't know. Maybe we'll try a reboot of this guy and find out if that fixes it. But this guy, Stel, if I go copy a file from this guy over, it is, to my knowledge, still going to use, yep, just 2 connections. And you can see 2 of them are sending at full speed and the rest of them are still receiving perfectly from the other system. So we're going to try a reboot because maybe it's a weird DNS issue. Something tells me there's a lot of DNS involved in this whole system here, which is letting it know that there's multiple interfaces. So I've tried all the simple stuff, can't seem to think of a way to get it to work on all of them. The other system works fine with all the NICs though, which is really weird. I'm going to play one of these guys. So these are USB 3 to gigabit Ethernet network cards. They can normally get over 900 megs a second, so they're reasonably fast actually. They're super cheap, you can get them for about $10 shipped on Amazon. And most systems have a USB 3 port. So we're going to find out, how well does this work? Can you actually, would it make sense getting one of these to get 2 gigabit if you can do it? So we're going to go toss one of these in the desktop and see if it helps. I've yet to find a way to force it, but it seems to be you sometimes have to reboot it to get it to work right. But once you reboot it, I've gotten that USB NIC working just fine with the onboard one. And I think that might be the issue with the other one. Sometimes you just gotta, there's something about DNS is something that the system has to learn if there's multiple paths. And if it doesn't work right, it's not going to use them all right. And we're getting a little bit slower on the USB one, about 910 versus 980 megabit with 220 megabit total. So yeah, actually, if you can do this cheaply, it's not a bad way to increase speed to something like a laptop where you can't just put a 10 gigabit NIC in it easily. The next question came to, what if your network connections aren't exactly the same speed? So first thing I did was looking at last time it was, well, they aren't sending at exactly the same speed because the USB NICs just aren't as good as the PCIe ones, but not by very much. Now I put this in a USB 2 port, which I'm getting roughly 280 some megabits per second max. It's working with the other one, and the other one's doing 570, but we're only getting 90 some megabits per second. So that's actually less than just having the single gigabit NIC alone. So that's not helping, that's weird. I guess it's time to go play with more different mixed network environments. So now I have a 100 meg NIC and I have a gigabit NIC. So if I try copying it with SMB Multichannel enabled, I see a little spike here, but it then dips down. I'm gonna make a bet that it does like a quick check to see how fast it is, and then says nope, too slow. So you know what? We're gonna confirm that. We're gonna see if it's either an issue of just not liking 100 meg, or if it doesn't like that. So we're gonna just go and set both network cards to 100 meg and see if it works fine with 200 meg NICs. With dual 100 megabit NICs, it works fine as well. We're getting about 20 megabytes per second, and both NICs are working at their full potential. So that works fine. It just seems like there's a certain difference limit between NICs that you can't go over. So now I have the network card, one's limited to about 300-ish megabits per second and one's 100 megabit. Doesn't work. You gotta have them pretty much, it looks like within like 20-30%, and it just decides if it's not within that amount, it'll just say I'm gonna use the faster one and forget about the slower one. Now that I've gone over some of, I'd say, the more common Windows applications, we're gonna try some Linux ones. So I guess there's 3 ways I can see it. Linux as a server, Linux as a client, or Linux as a server and the client. So first of all, we're doing Linux as the server. So I've set up my desktop here as a Linux desktop, and it's working fine. I mounted it on this Windows share. I made sure to mount it. If you get SMB multi-channel configuration, it's mounting it. It shows all the IPs it's doing. Now, yes, I only have one IP on one system, but I can see it is using both of them. So that means pretty much it'll work fine. For those who are wondering, it's these that are the big guys. AIO read size, AIO write size, and the big one is server channel support equals yes. You also have to be running a newer enough version of SAML to actually support it. but most new Linux distros, I know this is Fedora and it supports it just fine. I think the version that you need to support SMB multi-channel is 4.6, I believe, and I'm currently on 4.11 and just using whatever came up the repositories. The Linux server works pretty well. Looking at the client, I can't find a way to get it to work for the life of me. So this is the Samba wiki on the page about the Linux CIFS kernel. I look in here, I see the 5.5 kernel. And it mentions add SMB multi-channel support, improves performance. Can't find that mentioned anywhere else. Can't find that mentioned as a mount option. I mount it with it, and this technical thing should work because the Windows clients mount with it just fine. So it's not default. I try using the latest SMB version, so I forced 3.11. I don't know. If you know about this, let me know, but otherwise I'm going to just say there's no easy way to do it. I did a kind of quick look through the source code and can't find anything that shows this either. So I'm just going to say it's either not possible or very badly documented at this moment. In conclusion, SMB multi-channel for a lot of home users can provide a quite substantial performance benefit at a limited cost and a relatively easy to set up. Compared to other solutions like running 10 gigabit or NBASE-T, it's quite cheap as there's a lot of gigabit stuff already on the market. And if you already have multiple lines, it's quite easy to set up and use. And it's mostly plug and play, which is quite nice. And I've encountered a few random issues, but a lot of them seems to be dealt with rebooting. And also, if you want it to work well, you kind of want Windows to be in charge of DNS and DHCP. But it should work okay. Maybe I'll try more in the future without that. It's also kind of one of those, it's almost cheap enough to just kind of play with it and see if it helps in your use case. Compared to solutions like LACP, where you use multiple network cards for bonding, it's a lot easier to set up for most home users where you have unmanaged switches and lets you easily make a single stream faster. The big disadvantages are, at least for me, no Linux client support, and it's just weird issues.